Yeah. So this is a Shir Rambam, as everyone knows, but it's a Shir in the Rambam, what the Rambam thought, not what the Rambam said. Okay.
Can I see the keyboard?
Oh, you want to type? You want to? Yeah, so turn the screen around and use this. Oh, you have to take a. You could use that. Yeah, why not? Turn the whole thing around. Take a mouse. Where's my mouse? Where? Take this. Close this. I wanted to show this, but it's fine. Go out. You know how to go out? Whatever. Just click around until it goes away, and open another. And open another document. Control N.
Have the control.
Shine. Bye. You could do like Yitzchok Ginsburg when he speaks. They have someone typing it up as he speaks, so you could, like, if you don't follow him, you could follow the text. Also, Yitzchok Maimonides does this recently. I shall see this. It's a useful thing. But this is a Shir Rambam, and it's a Shir in what Rambam thought. Not in the sense that I think that he lied when he spoke, although that might also be a thing, but that's not something that I care about so much. That's what Mr. Harbatal cares much about a lot more, and wrote a whole book about it. But what it's about that, it's the same thing. But hello, hi. We're just starting, so
You brought me
okay.
my treats.
Yeah, I just started. Oh, thank you so much.
I'm not gonna just buy for you.
You take good care of me.
Wow.
This is an uncle.
No, this is not a Swedish guy. You don't know it
I
yet.
forgot the herring, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Wow.
I don't know, you said there were like 6 people here, so I don't know.
It's not.
Thank you.
Baruch Hashem, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Okay, it's about what the Rambam thought, meaning to say the why of his thought. I say it like this, right? The why of his thought, not that he said. Most people are like the Rambam hat gesagt, so therefore hat gesagt. Oh, she can. Okay. Second, I'm sorry.
We've done this.
Yeah, we did this already every time. Just when I get to it.
Let's start with this. This?
And so for some reason nobody cares about what he thought, but that's another whole story. And Kitzur Hamasa is now the big problem with understanding what he thought, even if you can like get some formulas or some like slogans of like Rambam said, and we did this same thing. Rambam said that in the Shema it says beferish and I printed it somewhere even. In that a soul of a person is the form of him, something like that. And things like that. And this has huge implications. By the way, just to be very clear, this has huge implications. This is nicht kein scientific or philosophical question. It has huge implications for religion, for life. And it has such huge implications that the Rambam himself, this is one of the most clear place maybe where he didn't tell anyone what he thinks. In other words, what if you think the way he thinks, if you have the kind of concepts that he's using, there's some, some implications of that, some things that come out of that. And he never spells it out entirely. He spells it out as much as he could, and he tries very much to teach you. See, this is a thing that Rambam does pretty well, and people don't realize. There's many things, like even in Chassidus or in any kind of... Basically, anyone that knows that's not like whatever my Rebbe and Chayde told me must be the truth, and in the way he formulated it. There are many things which change totally the meaning of what your Rebbe taught you in Chayde. Entirely. Like, it's so far that if you would go back and tell the Rebbe, you would say Rebbe Kodesh. And the Rambam says it explicitly, and he talks about Seid Satorah. And others say it very explicitly also. So therefore...
Do you mean it's going against, or it's going to...
Not against. It's if you... It doesn't translate back into that concepts. This is really what happens. If you change your concepts, right? Like if you have, I keep on using this example of having concepts as categories or like boxes where you put things in, right? So for example, if you have 2 boxes, one says black and one says white, right? And then someone tells you something is pink, which is not black or white, and not even like some tzidif of black and white. It's not, pink is not a shade of black and white. You could think it is, but let's say it's not. Then you just don't have a place for that, right? And if someone comes in the only way it's going to work in your language, I have 2 boxes in my mind. One is black and one is white. And I'm not even talking about gray, because gray is still based on these two concepts. So it's something in between. It's, somewhat black and somewhat white. If I tell you something like pink, or if I tell you something even worse, I tell you something like large, right? Large is not black or white. Large things can be black and white, but large is nicht schwarz oder was. Just no shaykhs. But maybe that's the correct concept for analyzing a certain thing. But then you go back to the person with those two boxes, and he tells you, listen, you got to fit into one of these boxes. Either you're black or you're white. And these boxes in religion's context are either you're Mammon or you're Epicoides. Which one are you? And tell you, I'm not a Mammon. I don't hold of this. You're asking the wrong question, basically. I halt nicht für die ganze Sache. Is there even a big Epicoides, right? And there's no way out of this problem, right? Which means that you can never go back. You can never go back to the baby language, to the language which only has 3 categories for everything, or 1, or whatever it is. There's no way to retranslate it. In other words, if someone asks, I'm going to say it like this, but maybe you'll understand. If someone asks, so what does the Rambam really think about Chesed Ma'asim? And what does he really think about Schar V'Einish? And you could look in Mark Shapiro's book, and all of these kind of people said, that someone said that he really doesn't believe in it in the way that you believe in it, which is true, but it's also very similar to this story, because you're confusing 2 worlds of thought, entire worlds. And that's why if you ask the Rambam, people say you're lying. If you go to ask the Rambam, actually, and people ask him, right? They said, look, we read your books, Sefer Hamada and Perishim Shnais and everything. We think they don't believe in Chesed Ma'asim. That's what people have said about the Rambam since today's book was published. 3 major controversies, one already in the time of the Rambam, where people said this, and he wrote a letter about it, and 2 after he died. They're all turning around this point, that you don't believe in Chesed Ma'asim. And it's true. In other words, what do you mean it's true? He thinks that it's the wrong concept. It might be technically true, but it's not relevant. It's not as I'm not getting. I can't talk about this in length right now. But the point is, it's true. In other words, these people they're not Amaratzim. The Ramban and others, and the Rambam himself answers, says, "What do you mean? I'm telling you, there's Chesed Ma'asim." Even says somewhere in the back of my book. But these people were not crazy. Let's not be real. We're allowed to say this over here. They were not crazy. The Rama and the Shlim Menahar and all the other people that were Choylek on the Rambam, this Rashiva from Baghdad, whatever his name was, they were not crazy. They understood what's going on. They understood that this is implied, that they didn't say that it says openly. Some people found like a remez here, you're saying, said that that's not the point. But it's implied by the way he structures the whole story, by the way he gives you the story of life and what the point of everything is. You're not saying that Chesed Ma'asim is the point. And the Mishnah says it is. Like the Yad Ramah, it goes Barichas and Sanhedrin. Yeah. Kut said, you don't believe in this. And the problem with this argument, and it's true, in other words, they understood that he's doing something, but the problem with this argument is that it's imposing it. He's saying, look, I have a bunch of concepts of how to think about everything, okay? I try to explain these concepts. I'm not hiding these concepts. I explain them very clearly in Mamish. I'm elaborating it. I'm making it very simple and giving a whole Agdom of Perishim Shnais, which is literally made to be able to be taught in Yeshiva Ketana. And I think that you can teach it to little kids, and they'll get it on their level, and so on. It gives you this whole. Remember the whole Agdom of Karlek, where he explains that pleasures. You can't explain a blind person pleasures of seeing, so I can't really explain you why my version of Adam Haba is better than your version, because it's just a whole different concept. You have to have some concept of it or taste it, however you want to say it. Good, so he gives you this explanation. And if you understood it, in other words, if you moved from the world of concepts where either there is Schar V'Einish and you die and you get the Beruten Gehenim or the Faket, or not, either you move past from that into some other concept where it's much more interesting to have the correct thoughts and that connects you with real pleasure and so on, or you don't move then, and then there's no answer to you. If you're going to insist on asking the question in your categories and say, listen, there's only these 2 categories, only either that people pop out of the grave and that's the tachlis, or they don't. So you know what the Ram answers you? Yes, they do. Of course they do. And he literally did this, and he wrote a whole letter to saying this. But that was a long letter. It wasn't as short as this, because he was trying to say in this letter, and some parts of it is that this is the answer for you. If you're stupid enough to ask this question, that's the answer. Why is this the answer? Because it's true. Whatever that implies for you, it's true. I believe that there's consequences for your actions, or whatever abstract things. I don't want you to go around saying less din less dain. I'm not saying less din less dain. In your little box where there's only either less din less dain or Chesed Ma'asim, there's Chesed Ma'asim, 100%. It's more true than the other option. It's the better option. I'm going to choose the better option. But in my concepts, and if you internalize my concepts, you'll stop asking this question. It's a silly question. If someone asks you, well, it says in the Pusik, okay, I believe the Pusik, no problem. It just doesn't make a big difference it's not enough important to the real thoughts that I have. This is a good example, and it's also the example over here. But the point is, there's no way to return. It's very important. There's no. That's why people say kol be'elei shivan and things like that, which is true. If I give you different concepts, and you realize that these are better concepts for living, right? That's what concepts are. Better concepts for living your life in. You live your life in concepts. you're not going to go back and say, but the Rebbe goes chai, so what's this? It's just silly. Now, maybe these concepts are bad or good. Maybe they're worse concepts. So they're worse. But I'm just saying to always insist on, but it has to make sense with what I said in chai, and people keep on insisting on this in all kinds of contexts. It's just dumb. Now, then, if you actually ask this question, the correct answer, according to Rambam at least, is to say yes. Whatever your Rebbe said is true, 100%. No problem.
So is this putting him in a pshuta in a negative place?
No, I don't know what a minapshita means.
It means so. It means to again.
No, what I'm trying. I don't know what it means by minapshita. If like the literal, for example, if you take concept of tchisa ma'isa, but kepashtis, the Rebbe literally says it's true with pashtis, but the point is, it's not important for him. But I'm not saying it's negative. It's just. And maybe his concepts are also not the only concepts. The Mekabilim come and say, look, you're doing the same mistake.
There's somebody, grandma's going to...
Yeah, exactly. So for the Rambam, that's not relevant enough. It's maybe true, but I can't say this because of the same problem. But the point is, it's not negative. Maybe negative in the sense of being not a very high intellectual level because you don't have the concepts, which that would like count as having just not being smart enough or something like that. So it's not bad. In other words, you should believe that. You really should. Because if you have these two choices, if it's either black or white, so since for whatever reason my pink is black, so you should say black. You got to choose that choice. So otherwise you choose a bad choice. So it's not negative. It's the correct choice. The correct choice. It's just negative in the sense that the whole, at least if you buy the next level, the different concept, then the whole question is wrong. And this is actually how he thinks he answers multi-crown. It's not. He doesn't think this is a problem. He thinks this answers most of the problems. Like. The whole thing where philosophy contradicts Torah is only because you're fitting those things into little boxes, and then they end up contradicting each other. But if you just give you a whole different set of boxes, then a lot of different things happen. But you're not going to have the problem that you had over there. You have different problems.
Would a muscle of this be, let's say, the age of the universe? Like, people like, is it 6,000 years old? It's like a trillion years old.
Yeah, that's a very bad muscle in so many ways. Oh, you don't want me to talk about this now. I could give you the Rambams. I could give you the Rambam's discussion. Where the Rambam explicitly doesn't talk about the age of the universe, but it talks about the eternity of the universe. And the Rambam sort of says, and again, I don't know what he believes, like you ask him, what did he really believe? So it depends. If you ask Rabbi Ibn Tiban, who translated him and must have understood it well, he said the Rambam really believes Kat Messiah. And there's a very serious authority for this question of what the Rambam believed. But if you ask Yitzchok Lowy,
You believe the what?
and the eternity of the world, that the world was forever. But that's very important. I gave a whole class. That doesn't mean that it was not created. And since most people don't have that concept, there was a whole series of classes about this. Point is, for the Rambam, these two questions are totally separable. They're totally separate questions, exactly. Being created and being created in time, and the word created might not be correct, but being yesh ma'ayin in some sense even, right? Being contingent on God, being created and being created in time are two totally different questions that people always keep on confusing. And since they keep on confusing it, he's going to tell you the story of being created in time, although it might not be accurate, because that implies God. And if you say not created in time, people think it means no God. Doesn't mean no God. Not only that, he thinks it means more God. But that's a whole other discussion. But the point is, it's another good example. Like if you're the Baal Shem Tov and you say, what do you mean? I don't need to be one shash nabarash. Put to the guy. Then the question doesn't begin. Lashon is basically going with that. In different style, but it's sort of kids. I can't talk about this. It's another example. I don't know if the whole question of how old the universe is not an interesting question.
Right,
it's just a question of chat and pussy.
But
It's an interesting question, but it's an interesting scientific question. It's not an interesting religious question.
Right, that's what I'm saying. That's like whatever you have this fight. And got no, my Rebbe said this. Like,
Yeah, that's a very simple example. It's too simple. I always want to try go 2 steps behind that. But yeah, of course. Like if there's only 2 boxes, either everything is the most simple level, or it's shtichsim, then the answer is it's true. Because it's more true than not. But if you understand that this is Ein Shal, and then there's another 1,000 different questions,
But it's
then
just like saying the pink is more white than it is black.
exactly, it's false. But that's the world we live in. We have to use the concepts we have. And some people like Mekabulim would come and say that Mr. Rambam has the same problem. Like there's more concepts that you're missing, and you're fitting everything into your concepts because that's what you have to do. Because otherwise you're not going to stand it. But that you're just missing some concepts, right? And the same thing happens. Where did I get into this whole thing? I'm getting lost. Okay, the same thing happens with us learning Rambam, right? Because we keep on pushing him into our concepts, and he had different ones. They're not less rational or more rational. They're just different. They ask different questions. It's very important to realize. And that like the story that you keep on coming with, or your friend, that they're just not rational enough because they didn't have the light of modern science or whatever. It's not true. They're just asking different questions, which lead to different answers and different kind of discoveries. But they're not less or more They just have different concepts, and they're very important. Where did I want to say from all of this? I don't remember.
That's when Rambam is being asked questions about certain things and ignores.
Yeah. So the very important thing is that the most important thing that he can teach you really is to have these concepts. Then you start to fit them together and see what things are born from putting together all these concepts, from thinking in these ways, and so on. And the least interesting question is to ask, but what did Rambam think in the level of my Chayder Rebbe? Or in the level of some other way of framing the question? Like, was he atheist or not? Like, or was he a Spinozist or not? Or whatever. All kinds of questions like that, which are silly. Because if you actually if you buy the concepts, you don't ask these questions. Either, well, maybe you'll say, I'm just convinced that this is the correct way to think, and therefore this is the conclusion. And like the Ram says, it's not necessarily important to tell it to everyone. That's another discussion. Like, you should always ask it. What you think and what you say are two totally different questions. Another philosophy, ethic, nisha. People think that is the same question. It's not. When you say you have to realize, you have to take into account the other person's boxes, right? You can't, otherwise you're just going to lie to him, right? So it's a different question. Not the emes. He's looking at the emes. The guy doesn't have the boxes to put your emes into. It's not relevant. You're just going to say words to him, and to him those words are going to mean something else. So the point was, so this is one of the great examples, and like I said, this was like one of the biggest points of controversy in actually with the Rambam, because when the Rambam comes and says, this is interesting, when the Rambam came, and there was the same controversy if you read the Rambam's letters and other people's letters, the Rambam came around and said, Rabbi said God is not a body. Okay, very radical thing to say. Nobody before him said it as sharply as he did.
That Hashem is not a body?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, he said that Hashem is not a body. He wrote it in... El Chumash doesn't say it, and the Gemara doesn't say it. But I'm not saying... I'm not saying... Okay. Listen. Okay, I can't say all the shirim. You have to assume this story because I'm not talking about this right now. No, I'm serious. This doesn't start. Believe me, that doesn't say. And believe me, not only you don't have to believe me. You have to believe all this gross tzaddikim that were cholek on the Rambam that said it. You can ask that Reb Nochum, will tell you the story more. The Rambam comes and says this, but he said this is the Rambam story at least. You could disagree. I'm not saying what it actually says. Okay, you have to just follow the story for a second. The Rambam comes and tells people Rabbi said God is not a body. Okay, now the Rambam himself says this. For most people, this sounds like saying God does not exist. Okay, try it on your children, you'll see. What is Hashem? Does he have a big difficulty? It's complicated. Maybe you could, but it's a serious question. What is Hashem? He's a thing. Okay, it's a big thing, a small thing. He's a person, not a person. None of these things. None of the above is the correct answer.
I don't get saying that Hashem doesn't have a body. Why that someone would arrive at that conclusion? Right?
Oh, for a very simple reason. Forget about talking about that person. For a very simple reason. Because if there's only two kinds of things in the world, well, things that exist, which are bodies, and things that don't exist. Right? Let's say, and this Rambam says this. Most people, according to the Rambam, and he probably means us too, only have these two boxes. Okay, either you exist and you're a body. Existence equals being a body. Now, body doesn't mean necessarily a body of a person, right? Even not a form. The wrong word for this shit. But a body. Okay, body is the word. A thing that has extension in space and time. You could say in the modern sense. Okay, although something physical, or all these words are. Each one of them is complicated. They each mean different things. But in the Rambam's language, is a body. Point is, to him, there's most people. And he says you can't imagine it for sure, right? He says you cannot imagine anything that's not a body because your imagination. According to the way he understands it, it's just copying things in the world and playing around with them, so you can't be imagined. And since most people, basically, that's what they think thoughts are. So most people don't have a concept of something that exists and is not a body. I think till this day, and not till this day, even more, right? That's basically what materialism means, right? Only bodies exist, okay? So, and therefore there's some theologians that, even some Jewish theologians that say we should be mevater on this. And the Lowy says this, not only. Very serious people said that we should give up on saying God is not a body, because for most people at least it means God doesn't exist. Because there's only these two boxes. Very simple thought here. You could argue whether it's true. Or you could argue in a lot of things, but the Mahalach thought is very simple. If there's only two boxes, body equal exist, not body not exist, then God is a body. That's the correct answer. And that's what Moshe Rabbani said. According to Rambam, Moshe Rabbani said God is a body because he understood that people, well, sometimes he says this. I'm not going to get into what he actually said. But because he understood that most people, then of course not a body like you, a bigger body, you can't see him, you're going to burn up if you see him, only the back you can see. All kinds of stories, but Tachlis is a body. And that's because you only have these two boxes. If you want to understand, and people actually said this. People said that Rambam is not an atheist, and say it to this day because he said God is not a body, and not a body, and not only not a body. He's none of the above, right? He's not any of the concepts that you have. Okay, people have said it, and have said this, and the Rambam thought that he could somehow convince people that it makes sense to say that God is not a body and still exists. And in some at work, people say it. I'm not sure if he thought that people are going to understand it, but at least they say it, and they don't seem to. So they don't feel like they're atheists.
Check it whichever box you want, but arrive at the right conclusion. So you can't really check the box that says there is no God, So pick the one that is a body.
Exactly.
Because you're going to arrive at that conclusion.
Exactly. It's like two things. There's yes, there is a God, there is a body, and there's two, like four things. So we choose the one that says yes, God, although it's not accurate, but it's more.
The lesser of the two evils. Exactly.
It's closer. It's close. It includes somewhat that God exists, right? So I want to say, in other words, when it says in the Torah that God has a body, what it means to say is God exists. But for you, body means exists, so I'll say that it's a body. But it doesn't really mean that. That's why he explains the Torah. But that's against the kids. The point is, and other people come and say, you person, you're an atheist, basically. You know that in the Roman world, no, it's true. There's a bunch of the Roman anti-Semitic writers, of which there were a bunch, all said one of the big things that they said was Jews are atheists. So this is a raya that Rambam didn't invent it, but I'm not getting into it. But they said Jews are atheists. Why? Because in their temple there's no God. What's a God? El Ha'elovan, Gedaf Tesla. What does it mean? You stole my God. You stole my shtickle. This is my God, right? And everyone went to the Jewish temple. At least in the second temple, the first temple there was something, but in the second temple there was the empty box. There was not even a box. It was an empty room. Okay, the Jews worship a temple with an empty room. Very weird thing. And all these people said these people are a bunch of atheists. They don't have a God. They said it about Christians too later. Persecuted as atheists.
Josephus writes about it.
Yeah, Josephus wrote against Epion for emphasis kashas. So Apion and someone else, I forgot the other guy, Takit, Tripo, whatever, they all say these things. And it's basically because of that. If your concept of religion is, you need a temple with a geshkeret, and otherwise, it's atheist. Why do you have a temple? And some philosophers said these Jews are philosophers. That's actually, the philosophers were always on the side. This is for Hanukkah. So then there's Aristotle had a student, Theophrastus, and Theophrastus has some talk about the Jews. And he was the yeshiva after Aristotle, in the yeshiva's Aristotle, I think. And Theophrastus says that the Jews are the only philosophical religion, because they don't worship a thing. And he even says that he heard that there was Mikdash, when they're Makriv Karbunis, they're Isaac and philosophy at the same time. And it's a Mishnah. There was Anshe Mamad. What did Anshe Mamad do? They learned Maaseh Bereishis, and so on. So he was even right. He says more things than that I'm not getting into, but there was like a thing among the Roman writers, either anti-Semite that said Jews don't believe in God, Greek and Roman writers, or the Jews are philosophers who don't believe in a bodily God, but they believe in a non-body God, just like the philosophers did. Socrates was persecuted for saying a God is not a body, and it's the same thing. So this is why if you believe in Yiddishkeit, believing God doesn't have a body, then you're on the side of the Yevunische philosophers against the Yevunim. That's the Rambam. He's anti-Yevunim. Antioch is going to tip. He meant got tagif. He so like Zeus, and that was Tzelem B'Hayachel, right? He's not Pekoyer, according to the Rambam and according to Socrates. But the Yidden, they said we have to take it out to send them from the Haichel. So, Kitzer, this is also a drusha from the Sefer Shmoney Dalet. Okay, Kitzer, and back to where I'm. So this is the point. If you have only these two boxes, and you see people always have these, right? If you're a Frimeid, what? The fourth Maccabees. The fourth Maccabees book says this drusha more or less, that the Jews are the real philosophers, and the Greeks, not only because of this, and doesn't explain this, but things like this. There's four Maccabees books. The fourth one says this. Okay, first two don't say this. Kitzer Amasa is, this is the problem of the world. If you only have your little boxes, then you're going to start saying that the other person that doesn't use their boxes, that says clicks none of the above, right? Are you believe in God? You know, kids, if you do believe in God, you have to say what God, right? Because for some people, believe in God believe in three guys that had babies and so on, and it's not, you don't believe in God. They really think so. And you see this happening all the time, right? We don't have to go more examples of this. But my example that I had to get to was about the soul. So again, in the soul has the same story going on with it, right? And the interesting thing is, and then I want to say this, I said this Shira yesterday, and I cited this pshat. The interesting thing is that the Rambam actually explicitly for himself, he justified himself for telling people that God doesn't have a body. He actually wrote a chapter to justify this. People read it backwards, but he's justifying himself, saying that I'm allowed to tell everyone that God is not a body, basically because he trusts the Jewish people to be smart enough. Since there's Targum Onkelos that translates the Torah this way, and everyone reads this in Shol, Perek Lamed Vav, Chelek Aleph, Perek Lamed Vav, and he's arguing. The context is that he's arguing with a Muslim philosopher named Ibn Bajjah, and another guy who wrote that we should not tell people that God doesn't have a body. We should tell them it's a big light and stuff, but we should never tell them that he's not a body because they can be atheists. And the Rambam says maybe that's true for Muslims, but it's not true for Jews. Ayid Ken Verstein. He doesn't say this, but I'm giving you a pshat in the Rambam. And basically he says we can understand it because he believes that the Targum Onkelos is very interested in denying God having a body, and since everyone learns this, so we could say it's safe. But very important. But the other things, the other questions. This is the only thing that the Rambam allows himself to say publicly. God doesn't have a body, and he says it explicitly. All the other questions, like is the soul a body, right? Similar question. Or are angels a body? The Rambam says explicitly in Against Chesamaisem that he believes that Maluchim are not bodies. Maluchim are just pure intellects. But he says explicitly, I don't care if you don't believe this. It's fine. Most people can't. The Rambam has Chalik Beis talks about this more. Most people can't imagine something that's not a body. Basically, well, God is somehow Yotz Manaklal because he somehow thinks they can get it. But most people, if there's Maluchim, and it's even important because Maluchim are not God, so it's complicated. Most people can't understand Maluchim unless they have some imagination. He has wings and so on. And the Novi says this, and it's not. So you know what? Believe that the Malach has 6 wings. Doesn't bother me. It's not because it's fine. It's wrong, but it's fine. It's fine if you believe that. And basically, he's not actually teaching people this, and he's fine with you believing that. And I think, and he doesn't say this, and I think it's because I think it's even bigger secret. He explicitly he hides the fact that he thinks that a soul is not a body either. Of course, it is a body. No, the soul is not a body. Somewhat analogous to this. In other words, now this was my akdama to my thing. In other words, there's certain concepts, right? There's certain concepts which they're not soul or body. By the way, we have to remember we're used to thinking of like there's a soul and there's a body and these are 2 things. The card says 2 substances or whatever. That's how most people, even the ones that believe in the soul, seem to think. And or you think that there's no such thing as a soul because there's only bodies. Non-dualist, right? Materialist. Or you think some other thoughts, but basically most people have these concepts in their head. Now it's very important to realize that the Rambam doesn't have any of these concepts in his head. None of these concepts. He doesn't have a soul and a body in the way that we're used to thinking it. Not because he's an apologist. You see people going and right away jump and say, so you don't believe that in Yitzchok and Nefesh, you don't believe that doing mitzvahs helps your soul. All kinds of things that people actually say. And people, if you look in Shabsi Frankel, Mechitzif in his Seif HaMaftach, he only brings people that are Cholek on the Rambam and these kind of things. And he brings you a whole list of people that say that the Rambam is totally wrong here because so is their Kol Yikra Torah and so on. This is like one of the biggest things that people are mad at the Rambam about. And this is all people being this kind of child where I don't buy your concepts. Okay, if you don't buy them, then the Rambam is nicht. But they're not really arguing with his concepts. They don't even have them. Or you could have them and argue, I'm not saying, but for the most part, that's what's going on. And the Rambam himself, I think, is the thing that he hid the most, what he actually thinks of the soul. He doesn't talk about it ever very explicitly. It's another question that I had, but I think this is the answer. There's like no... he talks about it a lot, very explicitly, but it never like puts it together in a way that people understand what's going on. And the people that followed the Rambam, the only place they got it, this was actually one of the books and the things that they took the most seriously, which was Aristotle's On the Soul and other summaries of these kinds of ideas where they sort of connected and said that shit is Rambam, and it probably is, but he doesn't say it because he thought that this was the most dangerous probably thing to say. But it's not really dangerous. It's only dangerous if you don't have these building blocks, these categories, these concepts in which it fits in, and then you start making sense of things. So that's why my class is supposedly only about trying to give us these concepts, and it's a very hard job to do because it's like a list of, I don't know how many, maybe like 20 different words that are very simple words and they're very tricky words, and like they're simple both in reality, like they're really trying to think things from first principles, like without any, like assuming any system of thought. Their system of thought is built in a very simple way. If you read Aristotle, you see doing it in all the philosophers, the first philosophers. Later people are just like, there's a whole shit and the mazbos on the shit. But the people that invented the shit, they didn't have a shit so to be mazbos. They had to like actually build it up from very basic thoughts. And it also ends up with very basic thoughts. Like people say, like, so the soul is the form of a living body. But these are 3 words that nobody knows what they mean. Right? Even though you don't know what they mean. And of is another word that doesn't need a whole Pyrrhic to explain. And is, and so on. And if you don't have, and then if you have this concept, then you could put them together in sentences and they make sense and understand what these sentences mean. But if you don't have the concepts, and since we live in a different world, in a different intellectual world, even the people that are very smart don't have any of these concepts. Even people that read a lot of philosophy, modern philosophy, don't have any of these concepts. So it's very hard to get to them. But we're trying. Excited?
Wow. It's a pretty impressive feat.
That's the whole Hakdama. That's the goal. And it's a very hard goal. It's a very hard goal. Last time we was?
It is, yeah.
Very hard goal because you have to like learn how to think like a different kind of person. Like and even I don't even know if it's true this way of thinking. I just want to make sense. Like let's say we'll be able to think both like this and like a modern person. You're already double as rich as everyone else, right? And probably in some ways it's kitzer. It's very, otherwise you just say words and you don't know what they are. It's like, Kabula, a kitzer. The Mekabulim have the same problem, because the first Mekabulim, they have concepts in their head, they're building things up, and then everyone is just getting the system as if it's a complete thing. So here's my list of where's my list of concepts? And one of these things I have lists of concepts. And it's a very big question which concept to start with and all of that, and there should be it's like a 10-year, and I don't myself know all the concepts, and maybe nobody does, because there's like so many of them, and it's very hard to pick out which is the most important one and how to really build things up. So I'm gonna start in this chapter. We did last week something.
The list?
I don't have it here. It's on that page. It's a small. It only has 5 things. Oh, open? No, you can't. And one of these things is a list of concepts. Here.
This one?
This one had some concepts. For example, there's more that I added to it. No, that's just Aristotle's text. In this, it says prerequisites. That was before. These are the concepts that I already think you should know. Nobody knows them, including me. That's 4th concept, but there's probably a list of 10 of things like that, or maybe a lot more. But because Aristotle literally spends 10 books just explaining his concepts and then using them. Wow. And that's how people used to learn it. They used to learn the logic, was called, and then start. And since people don't read in this order ever, so you're sort of missing everything. But let's try to start with something, and then you see. And what I said I'm going to do today, and I wrote a page that says what I'm going to do today. And what it says that I'm going to do is they have this chapter. This is the first chapter of the 2nd book of the Anima. And what this chapter does really, and it's not giving you concepts. What this chapter does is it puts together a list of 10. I don't know. I don't count. 5, 6. Here I got up to 8. So probably 8 concepts, which he already has. He doesn't explain them here. And then he puts them all together to create the definition of a soul, right? Even the word definition is a concept, right? But he puts them all together to create the definition of a soul. And that's the plan for this 10 months or whatever, as long as we're doing it, to try to get all these things and then to put that together definition and then see what follows from that and then see all of the things that happen. So we're up to this. So
you have to be careful. You might switch our operating systems.
Yeah, don't worry. It's fine.
You have to go the kitzvah.
It's very hard.
And then come back to the middle.
Thank you very much.
No, it's very hard even to... I'm not even sure how possible it is, but you can try. Very hard. So let's do something like this. So I don't know if you have this page. You have this page? And I'm going to work off this page. I'm going to try to just give you the story of this, and I'm going to stop where I think I'm up to. If you don't have this page, I don't know. I don't know, this one.
This one?
Yeah, this one. But I don't have one either now.
Oh, you need it? Yeah, take it.
Oh, you want to print more of this? Mag het hebben?
Ken je alleen een auswendig?
Ik ken ja, but ik houd van this. Meer. No, print more of this. The whole thing. Just press print. Control P. Yeah, print vanaf 2. How many people don't have it?
3.
3? Okay. I could do about pair, but okay, here you can take it back. No, take it home and just read it 100 times and see if it even makes sense, even one word. Mijn app is daar met de. Mag de video ganze tijd? Wat gaan video gaan? Okay, point is no, I'm serious. This is the one chapter, literally, it's a very important chapter because it's the most important place where he gives this definition. Although
how many pages is it?
It's 3 pages. Oh, it doesn't have page numbers. It's 3 pages, but it's probably not printed them correctly.
It's doing double side.
Double side is good. But it's.
But those 3 pages. How
Is it nicht collated? Ich weiß nicht.
Ah, okay, yeah.
It should print 2 of 2 and then 1 of 1.
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, it's like this. So we discussed we're going to get general definition. We talked about that last time. I wrote here number 2. Now number 3 is basically like this. So remember that there's, and I have my picture. I have the picture here. But don't if you want to write then. Well, remember that Aristotle analyzes. Aristotle, you can open the window if someone is hot and close that thing. Is it hot?
2 of these.
It got printed wrong?
Second. 6, 7.
Okay, het had geprinted, het kan ook het zijn. Get zo dan wel bij, gaan we misschien weer nog.
Did it print first?
Look at these.
Yeah,
No,
there's some of it here.
I don't know.
I think it's
I only need the first page anyway. I'm not going to get further than that. You can see now it has numbers, so you should be able to see where I'm going. We remember that there are, this is probably the most important point to start with, and it's a good place to start with, that this way of thinking, Aristotle thinks that there's different kinds of things, okay? Not only Aristotle thinks this, every single thinker besides some people from last week think this in different ways. So this is like the most important. I read Peter Anderson likes to say that the most important thing that modern philosophers think is like intuitively wrong, like doesn't make any sense, and that everyone else, he calls it Neoplatonism, but Neoplatonism means Aristotle and Plato, believe is true, is that things have come in different levels of reality. All the mystics also think this, and they think that it's just magic words, but it's true. In other words, that a thing can be a different, more or less, or different kind of thing than another thing in its thingness, not in its what it attributes, right? So if you can like abstract existence, right, or being, or essence, all these words are trying to get at the same thing, of a thing, besides like this is a cup, it could be a bigger cup or a smaller cup, but that's still not being different kind of being. It's just a different size, right? That's where really the concept of accidents, right? And we assume basically people, again, if you're a dualist, then you think there's at least two kinds of things, but only two. That's not a law, it's not enough. There needs to be a lot more. But if you're a materialist, which is probably what the intuition of most people start with, really, although they say they believe in other things, you believe there's one kind of thing, okay? A thing is basically something, well, if you look for a definition, you start getting stuck. But it's basically something that takes up some space and maybe some time too. Okay? So we already have space, and what kind of thing is that? Don't ask me. Gets it? But that's what most people seem to think. But the more important thing you're trying to get is there's only one kind of thing. Now, there's smaller things, there's atoms, and there's bigger things of them, and they move faster and slower and hotter and colder, which is just another way of saying faster and slower, and so on. But there's only one kind of thing, basically. Okay, one kind of thing in its thingness. You even get that we can take out the thingness or the being of a thing from everything else about it. Okay, the whatness. The Thomas like to say quiddity, the whatness of a thing. Okay, the what it is. Okay, and now the basic intuition of everyone before this is what we think, and then if someone tells this, okay, there's two of them, but there's still one kind of thing. There's two. So there's material things and non-material things. Okay, and they're both equally things. Right? So there's some klal called things, existence, things that exist, being, ich weiß nicht. Okay, so there's neshamas and gifim, but there's still the same kind. In other words, and we don't usually think we need different kind of concepts to analyze both of them, right? If you think of for example, if you think of the standard, the Cartesian dualism, there's matter, which acts, and you can learn mechanics and physics to learn how that acts, and basically souls also have to work in the same way, and we have a whole problem called the mind-body problem, because we don't have a way to explain how these two things work together. But we assume that they should work in basically the same way. They should affect things by causing them and have some kind of mechanical interpretation of how it works. But basically there's one kind of thing. And there's this one kind, and that which means that we need one kind of concept or one kind of tool, mental tool or mental model, however you want to call it, to explain things. Now there's a lot of different tools, but they're all one kind of thing. Okay? I hope I'm making any sense. Well, it makes sense, but you have to get the concept. If you're like a mystic, then it's natural to you to think this way. But rationally, people think that it's not rational. But all the old philosophers, all of them thought that this is a rational way to think. It's a normal way to think. And after this older machlokes and stuff, they all think that there's no reason to think that reality only comes in one flavor. There must be a lot of flavors of reality, and things have more or less being. Okay, they can be more or less of a thing. Very important to notice. And Aristotle, for example, wrote a book of categories, which is his version of describing this, well, at least part of his version of describing this question of separating being into different kinds of being. Okay, he says, Aristotle in his book says that there's 10 kinds of things. Some people say this is the 10 spheres. There's 10 kinds of things, and that's all. He figured out there's only 10. Okay, and Kant said there's 12, whatever. Point is, there's 10 kinds of things. And that exhausts the kinds of things. But these things, they're different kinds of things. They're not just a list of random 10 things. In other words, what if you want to see how this applies? In other words, every time I ask you about what a thing is, right? We're doing science. It's document 1. We're doing science. We want to understand what this thing is, right? First question is, you have to ask, what kind of a thing is it, right? If you ask me about blackness, what being black is, right? So, well, you have to basically first answer the word Bill Clinton's question, right? What does is mean, right? So the is, Bill Clinton famously said that the question is always what is means, okay? Chazali, that's what I found. There's another guy left that said the same thing. I forgot who. Okay? But it's very, by the way, he's right. There's a masse, but there's a ganz gerecht. Is, was meant is. Is means the same, the exact, the similar, yeah? There's a lot of ways of defining is. And if you ask what is black, what does it mean to be black? You got to understand what kind of is you're asking, right? And the Mushal, and this is, and Aristotle counted 10 of them, 10 meanings of the word is, basically. And they have different meanings. For example, and the most important distinction that he made, which he's referring to here, although there's a bunch more of them, is that, yeah, by the way, this is not a joke, because people actually go and after and say, and these 10 things, what kind of things are they? Like, that's a problem. He says you have to stop. He always had this thing like, no, they're not a thing. It's just, this is where everything starts. Well, Agapunim is a serious question. How do you define definitions? You know, like, Agapunim, he said there's at least 2 kinds of things. Very important for him, there are 2 kinds of things. Then there's 1 kind and 9 kinds of the other kind of thing, okay? And these 2 kinds of things were, he said, there are things, and there are things about things, or in things, or on things. Okay? So things are, he says, things that are certain this. That's what he is laying. If you look here, it's a particular this, okay? It's a very nice thing, because it shows you how simple his thought is, because then you have fancy words for this. But a this, a thing, something as a, you know, the Ken Zuger of them as is. And then there are things which are not a thing. Over here he's talking, already making it complicated, but the things that are not a thing are things that are only about something else. So for example, the basic example would be, he always talks about quality and quantity, right? It would tell you, if someone asks you what a cup is, and you answer it's 10 ounces, he didn't answer you what a cup is. He answered you a different question. Well, he answered you, how much of it is it, right? Or how big is it? Or how large? What is this size? So basically, he switched the question. And all of modern science basically is this trick. They just switch the question. If you ask a guy, what is heat? He says, well, heat is the molecules moving. Well, that's not what it is. That's how it happens, or what causes it, how many of it, how much the atomic weight, and so on. You just switch the question, and this is explicit. In my first man aside, they said we don't care about the question of what it is. We only care about the question of how it is, and how much of it is, and how does it affect other things. These are all for Aristotle, just different categories, which are not the most important one, because they're not the most real one. Because in a very basic way, right? Everyone knows this already.
No.
So this is like alphabet. In a very basic way, everything.
Call it a property.
Yeah, this is called properties. And properties. And science doesn't care about anything besides for properties. And some metaphysicians now, they say, male, what we call essence. Okay, kids said, the point is, in a very basic way, how much of a thing, right? This is very important. And he literally goes through 10 different questions. This is the most simple way of, I know, of explaining the categories. 10 different questions that you could ask about something. And I remember all 10 ever, and Aristotle himself never remembers all the 10. He's like, says this and this and this, and the rest, whatever, Ein Sham. But basically, right, if I ask you, what is Shmoney? So basically, I could say he has a green shirt, which is what my son says. But that's not answering the question. It's answering a different question, which is what he is wearing, right? Totally wrong question. Just the wrong question. Like, you would switch the question. But I asked you, what is the guy? He's the guy with the green shirt. Well, is he the guy with the green shirt? That's what he is? No, that's something that he does, something that he's wearing. Aristotle calls it a position, or it's one of his categories, basically. Something like that answers the question, what are you wearing? We could extract it. Like, and he like tries to mitamtum these categories. Like, what are you wearing is very similar to the question of where you're going, or are you sitting or standing, or something like that. But it's very different than the question of how much of him is it, right? How much is BMI? That's a totally different question of what you're wearing. It's a different kind. It even has a different relation to the what you are. These are all like, and relation itself is nothing, right? He is someone's brother. That's not what he is. That's his relation to something else, right? It's nothing about him. If his brother dies and he stops being his brother or whatever, nothing changes in him, right? So this is a very different kind of isis, right? Or he could be a part of him, which is another complication. What is a part? Or he could be. Okay, now the most important insight that he had, probably before him, but he articulates very well, is that there's something we call substance, and in Lashon Kodesh we call this etzem, right? Etzem, the word etzem or atzmas, that Chabad is so excited about. It's Aristotle's invention, and there's something he calls properties or mikrim or accidents in English. It's a very bad translation, accidents, because it makes you think of car accidents or whatever. But what it means is something that happens or is a fact, the real way. That's why this is another very good example of a word that everyone says just a substance and accidents. What is that? Okay, so what you should say in English is things and things about things. You shouldn't say facts about things, because it's not only facts, they're actually things, right? So you are a thing. Okay, now we have to figure out what that is, but that's the interesting question. You are a thing, Mr. Shmoney, Mr. This, Mr. That. Well, maybe that's not what you are, maybe that's just your name, but Kitzer, you're a human being. That's what you are. And then I can ask you, how much of you is there? Well, 200 pounds, whatever. what is your relation to some other human being? Well, he's my shver, and I'm his item, and he's my first cousin once removed, and so on. What kind of qualities do you have, right? What kind of midas do you have? How much money do you have? All these things are things about things. And the Rambam literally uses this, and he says, okay, I'm not getting into this. This is like mitzvah, because how much money you have is never about you. It's only about some relation that you have to some things in the world, which is important maybe, but it doesn't go back to you ever. So therefore, if you care about what you are, which makes sense to care about, you shouldn't care about how much money you have, you should care about what you are. Now, I have to figure out what a you is, but that's the interesting question. And most people are confused, because the Rambam it says it's like you're confused between accidents and substance. Most people don't know the difference. And most people, the Rambam says it's about God, right? If you tell them, like the Rambam has this nice Muslim about a king. If you ask a guy, who's the king? He says, well, the king is the guy with the crown. Well, that's maybe a sign, shows you who the king is. It's something the king is wearing. It's not the king. King is not a guy with a crown. If I put on a crown, it'll become a king, right? It's a story about the king. And you can say a lot of different things, and none of them are the thing. If you want to say what a king is, you have to sort of have the definition of the king, right? The essence of the king, or what it is to be a king. When we could find definition. The definition of a king maybe is, I don't know, the guy with the most power, or the guy, whatever that is, that's what a king is.
So is it changes in the context?
Exactly.
So meaning if I say, who is Shmoney?
Yeah, sometimes you just mean to say, how do I pick him out? But in the context, in language it changes in the context. But in metaphysics, if you want to know what kind of things exist in the world, exactly. What he truly is a soul. But at least the soul has to be that kind of thing.
Is there anything good about Shmoney?
Oh, then you're already saying something about him, right? Yeah, we want to know what he is. Really, scientifically, the way Aristotle thinks, the only way, the people are weird, because people change a lot, and they might become to different kind of things. But in the scientific sense, you would say he is a human being. That's what he is. Well, he is one of the human beings. There's a lot of human beings, but he's a human being. Okay, and that's really answers at least the scientific question before we get like the moral question and the individual soul that he has.
Accident is what is sensed.
Nothing to do with sensing. No, this is nothing.
Okay.
No, don't confuse. No, wait, forget. We're totally metaphysics here, because I'm gonna.
A ball.
We know.
And it's
I don't know if it's because I don't like. No, exactly. But I'm gonna get to you in a second. We have to always try to get these questions for what they are, and not confuse them with other questions which are very similar and very close. Because, for example, and many people start thinking, and people think this, okay? People who attack Aristotle attack this great kind of thinking since 600 years ago, a long time ago. People are saying that this is nonsense, because there's no what it is. What it is just give you a list of all its properties, and that's what it is. This is like mysticism. This is like you're saying words that nobody knows what they mean, and you can't see them, and so on. But that's not how he's thinking, because to him these are directly seen, or, well, at least directly thought or perceived. I don't know if the word seen is correct, because we have to know how sight works, which is a chapter in his book on this all. But point is, it's not correct. I'm just saying, you asked a very good question, but I'm going to say it. This is not the same question as what can we see, or what can we sense, and what can we know or think or believe. It's not. It doesn't. There's enough distinction.
I give you substance directly. I only know.
No, that's not true. That's not true. You see, that's not true. I don't know who told you that. It's not true. You know a substance directly. That's not true. We just like we know accidents, we know substances.
Any description about it though is going to be its accidents, right?
No, absolutely not. Definitions are defining substance, not through their accidents. They're supposed to.
The ball is red. Red is
red is like a classic example of something it doesn't have any substance. Red is not a real thing.
Right, it's an accident.
Not only scientifically it's not a real thing, but for Aristotle it's not a real thing either. Because nothing is red. Well, redness is red, but redness doesn't exist on its own ever. Did you ever see redness? There's no redness. There's only red things. So redness is a good example of something that only has like equal secondary existence. Maybe there's a form of redness. There's a machlokes about this.
Red
but
is strictly what your brain.
No, but Plato.
Through your eyes.
Okay, but that's you see. I think in whole. You know what you did now? Well, not you, but like this. Now you put in a whole bunch of concepts. Your brain seeing through your eyes. See, these people, they don't have any of these concepts. They might be true concepts. I'm not even saying if they're wrong, but we always superimpose this. Like we have this whole scientific picture in our head that we sort of got in wherever school we went.
How can we think about the color red without factoring in our eyes?
Yeah, maybe yes, and maybe not.
Because all of us see red that way.
Maybe.
We're colorblind.
Yeah, but red is something that something has, but it's never going to exist.
Exactly. You have to.
There's no red without a thing that is red.
Okay, I see.
I'm not saying that's not true. It's true. I'm not getting into that. Don't say Plato because you're saying things that you heard once that someone said that Plato. Ich weiß nicht. We have to start look with concepts very simple. Like imagine
red itself doesn't mean anything.
Exactly. If you substitute the word is for meaning, you get like half of the way to understanding what we're trying to say. Because, like I said, the word red, well, it doesn't mean, because you could say it means, but when to explain what it means, although he doesn't not only think about meaning, he's thinking about the thing, but meaning is actually gets you half the way there. Because you say red doesn't have a meaning without saying a red thing, even a red light or red, what's a thing that's red. Red in itself doesn't refer to anything, right? It's a way something else is. Okay? And therefore red or redness is an accident. It's not basically doesn't exist. Well, it exists, but like we could say in a secondary way. It's a strachet existence.
Largeness doesn't exist.
Exactly, largeness is the easier example, right? Same that's, but red, the color is always like a very basic example of a quality, and largeness is a quantity or something like that, right? How much of it, or largeness is really a relative, because large is larger than. Large is even worse. Large is not even about something. It's about the thing's relation to something else, because you can't be large without something else being small.
Do any accidents,
right? It's a relative.
Bigger than.
exist on their own?
What?
Do any accidents
No,
exist on
no.
their own?
That's what accident means. The accident, well, no, accident, it cannot exist on its own. By definition, by what it is, doesn't mean anything on its own. But that's a good way of saying it. Doesn't mean anything on its own. It means a fact about something else, or in something else, or there's different ways of being an accident. That's what I said. There's 9. Exactly. The substance is what something is either the substrate or the that about which other things, all everything are. What?
The examples which produce accidents.
I don't know what I mean by examples.
Like, I don't have any accidents without things. So this cup is something that can have things about it. Right?
Exactly.
There's no things about without things for them to be.
Exactly. There might not, it's the thing that makes accidents make sense. Right? That's what substance is.
Or allows them to exist.
What?
It's the thing that allows accidents to exist.
Yeah.
Or
Correct.
in this way.
Correct. It's what they exist in. Another way of saying it, or on, which is a slightly different meaning because there's different kinds of accidents. But in general, all of these things.
Or you can say it's the only way that we can observe them.
But that's what I was saying. I don't think the accidents are the only way we can observe the substance, because that causes you to think that substance is magic.
You can have an accident without being able to observe it, and then you don't need a substance.
What like there would be redness that just can't see redness? Well, that's not what redness is.
I'm talking about the accident. Like you're gonna have something happen.
Like largeness, a car accident. No, like
no, something metaphysical, something that I can't see.
That's really far away from me.
Besides, but that can have both a substance and an accident. You just don't know it. That's why I was trying to say that I don't think that this distinction between substance and accidents maps onto seeing and not seeing. That's a totally different question. How do I know, or where do I see it? Totally different question. It's related, because how do you know this? And maybe we generally only see accidents. Well, like Socrates said, we only see color. If you think about it, it sort of makes sense. The only thing you see is color. It's not entirely true though, but because we literally see depth, we see in 3 dimensions, which is like part of our seeing and so on. So I don't know what I was saying. I don't know if seeing or sensing is the same thing as properties. I don't think it's true. In other words, one have to get into the exact nitty-gritty of how they understand perceiving and all these kind of things. But sometimes we say things like substance is only seen by the mind, but it's still direct. In other words, because if you like think abstractly a little bit and you think of like the basic question that I ask you, you could answer that without any magic. Right? If I ask you what a cup is, I can give you a definition of a cup, what the being of a cup is. A cup is a thing, well, like in London's, you could take it, right? A cup is a thing that holds water, okay? And if it has a hole that's kemotzi days, is os cup. Okay, that's what a cup is. That's the essence of a cup. What it's made out of, which is going to be the matter of it, but it's still accidental to being a cup, right? A cup doesn't have to be. I thought of this example, right? Yiddish, you could say plastic glues. Plastic glues doesn't make sense. It's glues are the plastic. That's not the tziref, not glues, but it's mach from plastic, right? It's essentially a glues in the sense of a thing that holds water that you drink with. But that's what it is. That's the isness of it. That exists more than everything else. Well, together with the matter. That's why we can't sniff matter, but that's why matter is not an accident. But that's why there's a 2 distinctions I'm going to get in a second. But this is the most basic thing. So without like anything else, we already know that there's 2 kinds of things in the world. And if you come and ask me start the book in this way, if you come and ask me what is the soul, for example, we have to first decide, is it a thing or is it a thing about a thing? Is it like greatness or redness or largeness or tallness or doing and so on? Or is it a thing that other things are about, right? Now, so we have this like concept, it's an empty concept, like I didn't tell you which things are which things, right? But we have such a concept. Now we have to decide. Now the answer is going to be very complicated because unless you're like a very simple story, you could say like there's only one thing and everything is about that, whatever.
Is the soul a thing or is it the thing of?
Exactly. Is there a thing about, right, or a fact about, or a thing that happens to, and so on, right?
Is it okay?
Very serious question. Aristotle, for example, spent most of his time arguing with people that said the soul is not a thing, it's just a thing about other things. And Plato spends time arguing with this in the Phaedo and other things. So people say, well, the soul is not a thing, it's just you would say something like the harmony of the body. That's what Plato thinks someone's saying. Or it's just part of the body, and things like that. And then it's not a thing. And then it's irrelevant, totally. Not only is it a body, like, because it's something of the body, but it's not even a thing. And the body is more of a thing than the soul, if you think that.
It's like the redness
exactly.
doesn't exist.
It exists in a secondary way. It doesn't exist. There's nothing doesn't exist.
Right. I'm saying in for Plato, meaning if you have to choose between the soul existing as something about.
Yeah, it's Rachamasis. It's not very interesting.
And if you say it's a different kind of thing, then what is it?
But then we have to. But these are just two kinds of things, right? We could separate now. This is just like the most basic distinction. Now you can go through the 9 different. Well, if there's a kind. Now, 1 second. These are two kinds of things. Okay. So now Aristotle. So in other words, that's why you have to look at this. Like this is in the simplification. But you look at like he has the whole world in a box. Now we cut the box in half. Okay. Everything exists, but now there's two kinds of existing. There's existing and existing by yourself, like independently. You could call substance something exists independently, and there's something that exists because of something else, right? Not because is not the correct word, but about something else. Okay, now these two boxes, okay? Now in these two boxes we could cut a lot more times until we get down. These are the most general boxes. At least the one saying, some people say that the most two general boxes are matter and form, but this is at least the most two general boxes, okay? So if you look in step 4 in this page, you see that Aristotle thinks that he has a simple way of putting soul into the box of things and not things about things. Okay? And it says bodies especially are held to be things, to be substances. And of the bodies, natural bodies are more substance than others. Okay? So, he doesn't really give a proof for this, but he says something, so I don't know what the proof is. I don't remember if there's a proof or like a reason to think that. But this is like, at least for natural things, and there might be things that are not bodies and are also substances, but at least the soul is something to do with the body, like the soul of a living thing is something to do with the body, so we seem to be sort of in that neighborhood. But Aristotle says that bodies are generally held, and he uses this like as a starting point often, like people agree that bodies are things. In other words, there's things about them also, we'll get to that. So it's not enough to say body, because again, we have to remember that the word body doesn't mean what you think it means, okay? I can't tell you exactly what it means. But we have to assume that what it means is, for example, we'll do something like this. We'll say there is in the world a bunch of kind of things. They're not bodies. They might be not bodies. I'm not saying anything about those things. But everything that we can see or know about in the physical world and natural world is a body. Okay, that's like his most basic category. Let's remember this. His like most basic category. It's not the most basic category for many other people. For example, the very important thing you have to remember. So what I give you, I'm going to stop after this because it's going to be enough. But what I gave you now was first 2 big boxes called things and things about things, otherwise known as substance and accident. Okay, now I'm going to give you another big box, which is already an actual box, right? This was just a theoretical difference. Now I'm going to give you an actual thing. For him, everything in the physical world, he doesn't think that that's the only kind of thing that exists. So it's not the same as the previous. It doesn't fill up the entire previous box of everything that exists. But if you think of the physical world, so his like basic analysis, and not only his, but like all the old philosophers, again, until there were people then that disagreed with it. But Aristotle definitely thinks that the most basic kind of thing that exists, if you ask me what basically exists, right, basic meaning bottom layer, like things that on which everything else builds, is body. That's his word for that thing. And you have to think of it this way. Don't think of it that bodies are things that exist. The most basic things that exist is what he calls body. This is very different. For example, if you're Newton or Descartes in some ways, if you're modern, there was machlokes with this in Dachrei Masa. And
forces, right?
by the way, Einstein, no, forces are a new kind of thing. Einstein is more Aristotelian than Newton. Okay. People don't realize that. The whole thing with Einstein being Menatzach Newton is basically Aristotle being Menatzach Plato. And other people. In other words, let me tell you, there's a basic way of thinking that Newton thought this way, and Aristotle thinks is wrong. But Newton says that there are basically 2 things, which are time and space. And these are the absolute things. In other words, the way we think usually is something like this. and it's a good example of why you have to think of the word body in a different way. Because we tend to be taught for some reason a Newton way of thinking about space. And even Kant thinks this is like the condition, you can't think without this. It's so wrong because Aristotle totally thought backwards. And now, for example, if I ask a person, you go to a regular sheet, talk about Gashmi Sarach, right? So we say things, bodies. Gashmi is Gashmi things, another word that someone made up, are things that exist in time, in space, okay? Let's take our time for a second, but it's the same kind of thing. Things that exist in space. So what's known in philosophy as having an extension, right? That's a geometrical term, really. But things that not a point, points don't exist, right? Geometrical points. Just a theory, just like a theoretical thing. But anything that's not a point, and it's actual, has 3 dimensions, right? It exists in space. But the way we think about it is like this big container called space, empty container, known as absolute space, like an absolute frame of reference in the later physical sense, right? There's space, and then like there's things in space. So people would say that like God created the world, so we assume that He created in a logical order, although He doesn't have to. But let's say He created in a logical order. People say, well, first He created a place to put a world, known as Tzimtzum, and then He put the world inside, right? That's the way many people describe at least Tzimtzum, for example. Now this is totally not wrong, but it's totally not the way that Aristotle thinks. He thinks that this is assuming something that makes no sense. Because did he ever see empty space? Well, could you think of empty space even? He thinks that's illogical to think of empty space. It doesn't make sense. That's what he thinks. Newton thinks that you can't think of anything without empty space. So I'm not going to be machriya here.
Space is relational, right? If you have 2 things.
Exactly, that's what he thinks. That's what Einstein also thinks. But Einstein comes up with a whole chiddush to say this. But this is the basic way how Aristotle. Exactly. But that's and this was machlokes. And Newton comes and says, no, I could think of empty space. And I can think not only Newton, but people long before that said this. Not a chiddush. There are 2 basic ways of thinking, and there's no reason to say that one is the more simple way. These are McKen minds, and we can bring it ice and so on. But it's very important to realize, that's what I'm trying to say, we're used to thinking this way. We always think of space and time, even time, but time maybe not sure how we think. But at least of space, we tend to think of like this big container, a box, which includes everything. The whole universe is somehow in space. Well, what happens at the edge of the universe? Get the kasha, not think about too much. The point is, we think of like space as this like infinite thing, but it's totally empty, right? Doesn't do anything to you, right? Okay, we start talking about force, that is something maybe it does do, but it doesn't, basic way of thinking, it doesn't do anything to you, right? It's like an empty kind of existence. That's why Aristotle thinks this doesn't make any sense. Like, you're talking about something that's nothing. We think of space like we think usually, and this is like I think kids realize this, right? You think of space, you think of something full of air, but air is not nothing, right? That's why we say outer space, right? There's not even air. So what is there? Well, that's not true. There's distance, right? So there's not only space. Pretty full, this outer space place. It's not just empty space. There's no reason to think that it shows that there's empty space, right? It's full of energy and full of fields and stuff. It's full of stuff. It does things. It's not empty, right?
80 or 90% is dark.
Exactly, but it's something. You say dark matter. We don't know what it is. Just that you don't know. But the point is, we don't think that it's empty. Very important. We don't actually think that it's empty. Nobody nowadays thinks that space is empty. Besides for Newton, which we think is not really true. Nobody thinks that it's empty. It does something. It has fields. It does things. So it's not empty. It's not conceptually empty, right? It's empty because it's just like this place is empty when there's no tables in it, but just it's still full of air. It's not a vacuum, right? So I'm not saying where's the absolute vacuum. So it still has a thing going on. Maybe there's some. That's the question of this. The really vacuum is still a philosophical question more than a scientific question. Well, people like saying, well, we prove that vacuums exist. Well, that's not true because there's still things in that vacuum. There's just not air or whatever. There's still things going on. There's still forces and all kinds of stuff going on. So the point is, and Aristotle very clearly and argues in the physics at length that there's no empty space makes no sense. Okay.
Scientifically, they know this today.
That's no empty space. Again, I'm thinking this is like a philosophical question more than a scientific. The Einstein way of thinking. The Einstein is the one that everyone says was that the genius and said, well, what about we think of everything upside down, right? What if we say that time and space are things that about bodies or forces and not they're in space? But this is basically he said himself. I'm not saying this is Aristotle. He's just going back to the old shit. So in other words, going back to what I'm saying, well, nowadays we don't think of bodies as basic things. With even the physics, I think of fields and stuff. I don't know what those things are. Nobody knows what they are. But we know sort of what bodies are. But you have to remember, he's not thinking of that. To him, the most basic thing is a body. A body has space. So Aristotle literally says space and time are things about bodies also, by the way. They're accidents of bodies in some sense. Space is like the end of the body. We call space or something. Yeah, some formula for this that I don't understand now. But what I do know is that for him, body is the most basic thing in the physical world, at least. There might be an intellectual world, which is not a body world, but physical world, body is the most basic thing. Okay?
Space and time are facts about bodies.
Exactly. Very important. That's a very now, which means that when he hear the word body God is not a body, right? It doesn't mean God is not in time and space. That just messed up. It means God doesn't have time and space because there's no time and space about him. That's a very different thing to say. And most people think, oh, it's not a body, so it's not in time and space. That's true, but it's true backwards. When it means that most of the things you're going to think about are going to be wrong because you're thinking about it. Not wrong, in this way they're going to be wrong. Password, let's think mine. Because you're thinking about it in a different way. Yeah. Here. So, in verstehen. So, therefore, going back to our question of what is the soul, and we're assuming that the soul has something to do with the body. And again, body in this basic sense, not body, the body, which is the matter, and not the soul, because it's not that, right? Body in the basic sense of what all physical things are, at the most abstract or basic way. Okay. Now those things are obviously substances, because that's what everything else, right? There's a red body and a green body and a big body and a small body and a large body and a fast body and a slow body and a hot body and a soft body, all kinds of things like that. But they're all bodies, right? So body is, at least in this world of bodies, they're substances. And not only that, now we could connect something that we tried to explain at length last time, that there's something called two kinds of bodies. Now we could have this box of body. That's the most basic thing in the physical world, right? And there's two kinds of them, right? Called natural bodies and unnatural bodies and artificial bodies. And we tried to explain what this means last week, or 2 weeks ago. And now you can understand why it makes total sense to think of natural bodies as the substances and artificial bodies. Well, less. Again, then it becomes a sort of relative term because most substances, just the body in general, but natural bodies are substances. Why are they substances? Because they're what everything else is made out of, right? So everything else is really about, or what it is, or what it does, and what it happens to it, and what all kinds of things are just about, right? Because a cup is not a real thing, less of a real thing than what it's made out of, which is ceramic, whatever this cup is made out of. Because ceramic, natural doesn't mean found in nature, right? Natural means, which is again, assuming a lot of concepts. Natural means something that just is by itself. It's basically similar to something in a substance, but not only a substance. A natural thing is a body, which is not, besides being a substance, also has some nature. Remember, you ever heard of this word nature? Okay, nature, I'm serious. Nature is this interesting thing where it's basically a kind of form, right? Nature is another word for form. Think about it. Or a form of a body is what we call nature. Or a form of a not body would not be called nature. But all forms of bodies are natures. Nature is when we say, in other words, we observe that everything in the world, right? Like rocks do certain things. Remember we tried to explain last week what rocks do, but they do things. That's another whole concept that you have to remember. Rocks do things, in other words, they fall down. Okay? They don't fall sideways, they only fall down. So they not only do things, they do certain very defined things. They have a way, a pattern, there's a logic and there's a logos in rocks, right? There's a logic to what they do. There's a definition to what they do. They're just undefined matter. They're made out of undefined matter also. But the rocks as rocks have natures, right? They do something. They're hard, they have hardness, they have what?
The nature of somebody, like his nature is...
Yeah, that's already high level because it's a very complicated thing, right? That's why I start with rocks. Also, it's like no, it's complicated. When you say the nature of a person, that's like, you call it second nature because it just means a habit. Because it's not really, again, it's an accident relative to what the person really is. But that's another, there was a class here already about natures of people, no? Virtues. Anyways, yeah, you go by that class. Point is, the word nature, which is, again, a word that everyone uses and in totally different ways. For Aristotle, this is what it means. Nature is this thing about a rock that it's something besides just being, right? It's not just a body, do nothing. It's not just a potential, whatever, we're not discussing that now. It actually does, it lives, not lives, it's not alive. It does, it acts, I can say the word act, acts, or change, another word change, in a specific way, okay? They fall down, not up, not sideways, they have hardness, and therefore you could take a rock and make it into a knife, right? Which you can't do with water, right? So there's something in the rock that makes it that. That's what we call nature of a rock. And water has different nature, and so on. But now the thing that you can make out of the rock is not natural, because it doesn't cut by itself. It cuts with the rock in it, right? And that actually it's not alive. It's another thing. But the point is, it's not natural because it doesn't have. It's the thing that it doesn't do from what it is, right? That's why our basic definition of not natural things are things that don't do what they are, right? Rocks do what they are. They don't do much besides for falling down and staying there. But they do something, not something else, right? It's not random. Rocks, and there's kinds of rocks and so on. But they don't do much. And if you take a rock and you cut it into a house or you make it into a tool, right? the rack just stays a rack, which is why the tool doesn't do anything without someone picking it up and moving. So the toolness of it is very different than the rackness of it. The rackness of it still does rackness. It cuts, it's hard, it's whatever the Irish thing about the teva, the nature that it is, it didn't change.
The camera does what it's not.
Exactly. It only does when you press the shutter, right? But we spoke about cameras. It's very complicated. Cameras are for such complicated things. Let's talk about simple things. So we're in the old file. There's no cameras.
You talk about cameras the whole
yeah, I know, but it makes you confused because you have so many concepts about it. Let's talk about racks. And racks, you take a rack and you make a tool out of it, okay? This tool is not a natural thing. What does it mean it's not a natural thing? It doesn't only mean I didn't find it in this forest. Okay, what it means is, I might have found it in the forest. That's a different discussion, right? What it means is that tools are things that cut, knife is something that cuts, and racks are not things that cut. In other words, racks are, to the extent that the tool cuts, it's the rack that's cutting, not the tool. But the cutting actually needs to be done by someone cutting, right? Mashankan racks, whatever the racks do, which is very little, they just do by themselves. Nobody has to do it to them. They just do it by themselves. Well, unlike Newton, which is like gravity that does it to him. But according to Aristotle, they just do it by themselves because they're racks. Why does the rack fall down? Because it's a rack. In other words, it has a nature of a rack. That's just a fancy word to describe this very long sentence of a rack is a rack and a rack and a rack and a rack. So instead of saying that, we give these special names. So we say the fact that racks act in specific ways, we call the nature of a rack. Mashankan unnatural things don't have that kind of nature, right? They don't do what they are. Very interesting thing about them, they don't cut. Knives don't cut, like everyone knows, guns don't shoot, right? They don't cut. Well, guns shoot, right? But it's like the metal in the gun that shoots, and the powers and so on. Besides for needing a person to shoot it, but it's important for a gun to be made out of something that cuts, right? Or that shoots or whatever, right? But that thing is a natural thing. That's the more basic thing in the knife, that the knife is made out of, or the gun is made out of. But it's not what a gun is. What a gun is a dead thing. In other words, not an unnatural. Forget about that. That is another level. I'm going to talk about it next time. But it's a non-natural thing. In the sense of, it doesn't do what it is. Right? Its parts do what it is. In other words, it's not its parts. Its substances, the things that it's made of, the natural things do what they do, and they can just continue to do it. And since they're in a certain form, they can do it when someone pushes it in a more nice way, but they don't do what they are. Stones always stone. They never stop stoning. I'm very serious. You have to verb make these things into a verb. The stoning of a stone is the nature of it, okay? Guns don't gun. There's no such thing as the nature of a gun. Guns don't have a nature.
But metals.
Exactly. The metal of the gun metals, and the trigger of the trigger triggers, and all the things in the gun do what they were always told to do. Nothing wrong. But the gun does do nothing. The only thing that does with the gun is the guy holding the gun, which is another whole master, right? It needs an external thing to make it do. And at some point it has to go back to a natural power, which the guy has somewhere. It's a natural thing that's doing it. Which means that only natural bodies are substances relative to artificial bodies. Which goes back to us being able to say that a soul, which is something about a body in some way, or something about a body, not an accident. Very important. The soul is something about a body, although it's not an accident. So you get another concept to figure out. But it's a substance, and not a something about something else. Very important thing to remember, and this is going to stop here. Souls, according to him, are about bodies, but not of bodies. They're not accidents of bodies. They're a nature of bodies, basically. That's what they're very important. And then we figure out what kind of nature. That's another whole thing. But now we have a few words that start to make sense, I hope. Share for you for the natural, unnatural cookies.
Should we just leave it in the corner?
You could take it.